April 23, 1945. Somewhere along the Elbe River, central Germany. The morning air carried the scent of wet earth and charred wood. A convoy of American trucks rumbled to a halt beside a barbed wire enclosure that had once been a labor camp, now liberated but not yet understood. The women inside stood motionless, their eyes hollow, their bodies draped in threadbare uniforms that hung like ghosts of fabric. They did not cheer. They did not wave. They simply stared, as if the concept of rescue had become too foreign to comprehend. Private First Class Robert Harmon stepped down from the lead truck, his boots crunching on gravel still damp from the night's rain. In his arms, he carried a wooden crate. Not ammunition, not rations, but something the women behind that fence had not seen in years: bars of white soap, neatly wrapped in wax paper. Beside him, other soldiers carried towels, clean and folded, smelling faintly of military-issued detergent. To these men, it was routine. To the women watching, it was impossible. One of them, a Polish woman named Krystyna Lamdowska, would later write in her diary, "I thought they were bringing us something to sign, some new document of servitude. When the soldier handed me soap through the wire, I did not know whether to laugh or weep. I had forgotten what soap felt like." This is not a story of a single battle or a famous general. This is a story of an object so simple, so mundane, that it became a symbol of everything the Third Reich had promised and failed to deliver. A story of women who had been taught that they were enemies of civilization, only to be handed towels by men who treated them as human beings. And in that exchange, quiet, undramatic, almost invisible in the grand sweep of history and ideology, began to crumble, not with a roar, but with the soft rustle of soap being unwrapped. To understand what that moment meant, we must first understand what these women had endured, and more importantly, what they had been told. By the spring of 1945, Nazi Germany had mobilized millions of women, some as soldiers, some as auxiliaries, some as forced laborers. Female prisoners of war were a complex category within the Reich's brutal hierarchy. Many were Soviet partisans captured during Germany's disastrous eastern campaigns. Others were resistance fighters from Poland, France, Yugoslavia. Some were nurses, radio operators, even pilots. The Luftwaffe's female anti-aircraft units, the Luftwaffenhelferinnen, had seen combat in Berlin and Dresden. When captured by advancing Soviet forces, many chose suicide over surrender. Those who fell into Western Allied hands expected the same brutality they had been trained to believe all enemies possessed. Nazi propaganda had spent years constructing a very particular image of the Western Allies, especially the Americans. According to Joseph Goebbels' Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, American soldiers were degenerate barbarians, led by Jewish financiers and commanded by racially inferior officers. They were depicted as criminals released from prison to fight, savages who would rape, pillage, and destroy everything German they encountered. For women, the message was even darker. Capture by Americans meant dishonor, torture, enslavement. In the Völkischer Beobachter, the Nazi Party's official newspaper, a February 1945 article titled "The Enemy Knows No Mercy" described American POW camps as death factories where prisoners were starved, beaten, and humiliated. German women serving in auxiliary roles were warned explicitly, "The American does not see you as a soldier, he sees you as prey." But propaganda, no matter how thorough, collides eventually with reality, and reality arrived in American trucks carrying soap. The first encounters between American forces and female POWs occurred in late 1944, as Allied armies pushed into the Rhineland. The 82nd Airborne Division liberated a small detention facility near Aachen in October, finding 37 women who had been classified as enemy combatants, most of them German civilians accused of sabotage or espionage. Major William Prescott, the officer in charge, filed a report that would later become part of the U.S. Army's official record. The women were in poor physical condition but not brutalized. They expected execution. When informed they would be processed as POWs under Geneva Convention protocols, several fainted. One woman, approximately 35 years old, asked repeatedly if we intended to remove their clothing. We assured her this was not the case. She did not believe us for several hours. This pattern repeated itself across Germany as the Allied advance continued. Female POWs, whether Wehrmacht auxiliaries, SS guards, or civilian detainees, arrived at American processing centers expecting the worst. What they encountered instead was a bureaucracy that treated them as prisoners, not animals. But it was not the bureaucracy that shattered their expectations. It was the soap. Soap seems an absurdly small thing to focus on when discussing the collapse of a totalitarian regime, yet in the context of wartime Germany, soap was not small at all. It was a luxury that had vanished from the lives of ordinary Germans by 1943, and from the lives of prisoners and laborers far earlier. The Reich's economy, built on conquest and plunder, had always struggled with basic consumer goods. As early as 1942, German civilians were allotted 1 bar of soap per month, if it was available. By 1944, that ration existed only on paper. Soap required fats, and fats were diverted to the war machine. Lubricants for vehicles, components for explosives, sustenance for soldiers. Synthetic substitutes made from coal tar and clay were harsh and ineffective. Many Germans stopped bathing regularly, not out of choice but necessity. For prisoners, soap was a distant memory. In the labor camps, concentration camps, and POW facilities run by the Reich, cleanliness was not a right but a privilege extended or withheld as a tool of control. Women in these facilities described going months without soap, washing themselves, if at all, with cold water and sand. Lice infestations were common. Skin infections festered. The degradation was not incidental. It was deliberate. To strip someone of the ability to clean themselves is to strip them of dignity, to reduce them to something less than human. So when American soldiers offered soap, real soap, white and smooth and smelling faintly of lye, was not simply a hygienic gesture. It was a statement. It said, "You are a person. You deserve cleanliness. You are not beneath us." The symbolism of the soap was not lost on the women who received it. Testimonies collected by the Red Cross and later by historians paint a picture of profound psychological dissonance. These women had been raised or indoctrinated in a system that taught them that National Socialism represented the pinnacle of civilization, that the Reich was the guardian of culture and order against the chaos of Bolshevism and the decadence of the West. They had been told that Germany, even in defeat, stood for something higher. And then they met Americans who handed out soap. Gisela Hartmann, a signals operator for the Wehrmacht captured near Remagen in March 1945, described her experience in an interview conducted in 1983. "We had been told the Americans were crude, that they had no culture, no refinement. We believed this. Why would we not? We had never seen an American, only what the newsreels showed us, gangsters and cowboys. When I was taken to the camp, I expected them to laugh at us, to treat us as the Russians treated their prisoners. Instead, they gave us soap and towels. They told us where the showers were. The water was warm. I stood under that water, and I wept, not because I was grateful, but because I was confused. I did not understand how the enemy could be kind." This confusion was not unique to Gisela. It echoed across dozens of testimonies. The women had expected cruelty and found competence. They had expected deprivation and found abundance. They had expected humiliation and found indifference. Not the indifference of contempt, but the indifference of a system that processed them as human beings, not enemies to be destroyed. The American military's approach to POWs was rooted in the Geneva Convention, but it was also rooted in something deeper, a logistical and ideological framework that assumed prisoners would be treated, fed, and housed adequately because to do otherwise was inefficient and contrary to American values. The United States, insulated from bombing and invasion, possessed resources that seemed infinite to Europeans who had lived through years of rationing. American soldiers ate fresh meat, drank coffee, smoked cigarettes without limit. They threw away food that German soldiers would have fought over. To the women in those camps, this abundance was incomprehensible, and the soap became the symbol of it, a small, mundane object that revealed a chasm between two worlds. Let us consider the logistical reality. In 1945, the U.S. Army was supplying millions of soldiers across multiple theaters of war. The scale of this operation defies easy comprehension. Every month, American factories produced 3.5 million bars of soap specifically for military use. This soap was shipped across oceans, loaded onto trucks, distributed to units in the field. It was treated as essential, not optional. Cleanliness in the American military doctrine was a matter of combat readiness. Soldiers who could not bathe became ill. Illness weakened units. Therefore, soap was as vital as ammunition. This logic extended to POW camps. The U.S., Army's Manual for the Administration of Prisoner of War Camps, published in 1944, mandated that prisoners receive regular access to washing facilities, soap, and clean clothing. This was not altruism. It was pragmatism. Disease did not respect the boundaries between captors and captives. A typhus outbreak in a POW camp could spread to nearby American units. Thus, prisoners were kept clean. But to the women receiving that soap, the rationale did not matter. What mattered was the soap itself, the texture, the smell, the simple fact of its existence. It was proof that the propaganda had lied, that the Americans were not savages, that the Reich's vision of the world was fundamentally false. There is a photograph taken by a U.S. Army Signal Corps photographer in May 1945 that captures this moment better than words. It shows a group of women, German, Polish, Russian, their nationalities blurred by months of captivity, standing outside a newly liberated camp. They are holding bars of soap, turning them over in their hands as if examining artifacts from another planet. One woman has raised the soap to her nose, inhaling. Her expression is unreadable, caught somewhere between wonder and grief. The photograph was never widely published. It did not fit the narrative that either side wanted to tell. The Americans preferred images of grateful, liberated prisoners waving at tanks. The Germans, in the years after the war, preferred not to think about what their soldiers and citizens had experienced, but the photograph survives, tucked into the archives of the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. A silent testament to a moment when ideology met reality and reality won. The transformation these women underwent was not immediate. Decades later, psychologists studying the reintegration of former POWs would identify a pattern they called cognitive restructuring, the painful process of reconciling deeply held beliefs with contradictory evidence. For many of these women, the soap was the first crack in that belief system. It did not destroy their ideology overnight, but it planted a seed of doubt. Helga Schneider, a former Blitzmodell, a young woman who served in the Nazi Communications Corps, wrote about this process in her 1992 memoir, The Girl Who Loved the Führer. I had been raised to believe that we were the superior people, that our cause was just, that our enemies were less than human. The soap did not change my mind. Not at first. I told myself it was a trick, that they were fattening us up for some worse fate. But as the days passed and the trick never came, I began to ask questions I had never allowed myself to ask. If they could give us soap, what else had we been lied to about? This questioning was dangerous, not because it led to rebellion, but because it led to silence. Many of these women returned to Germany after the war and never spoke of what they had experienced. They carried the soap metaphorically and in some cases literally as a secret shame. They had been defeated not by superior firepower, but by superior humanity, and that defeat could not be reconciled with the ideology they had served. But not all remained silent. Some, like Krystyna Lewandowska, the Polish woman mentioned at the beginning of this account, chose to document their experiences. Krystyna spent 3 years in a German labor camp before her liberation by American forces. In her diary, preserved now in the archives of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, she describes the moment she was given soap. The soldier was young, perhaps 20. He did not speak German, and I did not speak English. He handed me the soap and a towel, and he smiled. Not a mocking smile, but a kind one. I had not seen kindness in so long that I did not recognize it at first. I thought he was simple-minded, perhaps. Then I realized he truly did not hate me. To him, I was just another prisoner to be processed, and that indifference, that bureaucratic lack of malice, was more shocking than any cruelty could have been. Krystyna's observation is profound. The Americans did not need to hate their enemies because they did not define themselves by their enemies. This was incomprehensible to people who had lived under fascism, a system built entirely on the concept of eternal struggle against existential foes. The Reich needed enemies to justify its existence. America did not. It could afford to be indifferent, and in that indifference lay a power the Reich could never match. The soap also revealed something else: the vast economic disparity between the United States and Germany. By 1945, the German economy was in ruins. Factories lay in rubble. Transportation networks were shattered, and the population was surviving on rations that barely qualified as sustenance. The average German civilian consumed 1,200 calories per day, half of what was considered necessary for survival. Prisoners consumed less. Meanwhile, American soldiers stationed in Germany ate 4,000 calories per day. They had access to chocolate, canned fruit, white bread, fresh meat. They smoked Lucky Strikes and drank Coca-Cola. They watched movies on portable projectors and listened to Glenn Miller on the radio. To German and Eastern European prisoners, this abundance seemed almost obscene. It was not merely wealth. It was a different conception of what life could be. The soap symbolized this difference. It was not a luxury item in America. It was a basic commodity produced in such quantities that it could be given away to prisoners without a second thought. This casual abundance was more demoralizing to the defenders of the Third Reich than any battlefield defeat. It revealed that the Reich had never been competing in the same league. Germany was fighting for survival. America was fighting with one hand tied behind its back. There is a danger in telling this story, of oversimplifying it, of turning it into a morality tale, where the good Americans liberated the grateful prisoners and everyone learned a valuable lesson. The reality was messier. Not all American soldiers were kind. Some were indifferent, some were cruel, some were simply exhausted by years of war. Not all female POWs were grateful. Some remained defiant, clinging to their ideology even in the face of contradictory evidence. Some pretended to be victims when they had been perpetrators, but the soap transcended these individual variations. It was a systemic gesture, repeated thousands of times across hundreds of camps, and cumulatively, those gestures added up to something larger than any one act of kindness or cruelty. They added up to a vision of what a society could be when it was not defined by scarcity and struggle. The epilogue of this story is not a single moment, but a slow unfolding. In the decades after the war, many of these women rebuilt their lives. Some returned to Germany and became part of the Reconstruction, helping to build the Federal Republic. Some immigrated to America or elsewhere seeking distance from the past. A few became historians or writers documenting what they had seen. And some kept the soap. In interviews conducted in the 1980s and 1990s, several former POWs admitted that they had kept the bars of soap they were given by American soldiers. They had not used them. Instead, they had wrapped them carefully and stored them away, as if preserving a piece of evidence from a trial that would never be held. One woman, interviewed in 1989, explained, "I kept it because I needed to remember that it was real. That for a moment, in the middle of all that horror, someone treated me like a person. I did not deserve it. I was not innocent. But they gave it to me anyway, and that changed everything." This is the power of the simple gesture, the mundane object elevated by context into something approaching the sacred. The soap did not end the war. It did not punish the guilty or redeem the complicit, but it did something quieter and perhaps more profound. It reminded people that humanity could survive even the most determined attempts to extinguish it. In the grand sweep of history, the liberation of female POWs by American forces in 1945 is a footnote. There are no famous battles associated with it, no iconic photographs that define the moment, but within that footnote lies a truth about the nature of power and the fragility of ideology. The Third Reich built its identity on the myth of superiority, on the belief that it represented the apex of human civilization. It demanded total loyalty, total sacrifice, and in return promised glory and dominance. But when its subjects encountered an enemy that could afford to give away soap, that myth collapsed. Not loudly, not all at once, but quietly, in the minds of women standing in a camp, holding a bar of soap, and realizing that everything they had been told was a lie. The soap was not a weapon. It was not a tool of propaganda. It was simply soap. But in the context of that moment, it became something more. A symbol of abundance in the face of scarcity, of decency in the face of cruelty, of a world where resources were so plentiful that even enemies could be treated as human beings. And in the end, that was the most damning indictment of all. The Reich fell not because it was defeated militarily, though it was. It fell because it could not compete with a society that had soap to spare. 79 years later, in a museum in Berlin, there is a small display case. Inside it sits a bar of soap, yellowed with age, still wrapped in wax paper. The label, faded but legible, reads, U.S. Army Issue, 1945. Beside it is a handwritten note, in German, dated 1947. This soap was given to me by an American soldier when I was a prisoner. I kept it to remember that kindness is not weakness and that abundance is not evil. I kept it to remind myself that I was wrong about many things, but I can still choose to be right about what comes next. The note is unsigned. The woman who wrote it is long gone, but the soap remains, a silent witness to the moment when an empire built on lies was undone by the simple act of human decency, wrapped in wax paper and offered through a wire fence. This is how ideologies die, not with a roar, but with the soft rustle of soap being unwrapped, not with grand declarations, but with the quiet recognition that the enemy was never the monster you were told to fear, and in that recognition, the beginning of something new. Not redemption, perhaps, but the possibility of it. Not forgiveness, but the faint outline of understanding. The soap sits in its case, and the visitors pass by, and the story continues, quiet and persistent, like water wearing away stone. One small gesture at a time, one bar of soap, one moment of humanity in an ocean of cruelty. And that, in the end, is what freedom looks like. Not a flag or a declaration, but a bar of soap, offered without condition, asking nothing in return, proving by its very existence that another world is possible. A world with soap to spare.